Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome back to Aerospace Nation. Now, in Europe, we're witnessing raw Russian aggression as its war in Ukraine has dramatically altered the security calculus, not just for NATO and our European allies, but for the U.S. as well. It's necessitated a rapid adaptation of our force posture, operational concepts, and partnership strategies. At the same time, in Africa, we're facing a complex mix of challenges, everything from violent extremism to the increasing influence of both China and Russia. Ensuring stability and security across Africa requires the smart employment of air power. Now, to help us understand how the U.S. Air Force is adapting to meet these challenges, I'm really pleased today to have General Jim Scorch Hecker join us. General Hecker is the commander of U.S. Air Forces in Europe and Air Forces Africa. So Scorch, thanks for taking the time to join us today. To kick this thing off, I'd like to offer you the opportunity to provide us an overview of your perspectives regarding the challenges that you face. So over to you.
Well, great, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. It's good to be on your show again here. And really thanks to the Mitchell Institute for the opportunity. As you mentioned, things are still busy over here. We have a lot going on when you look at, of course, the war that's happening in Ukraine. You look what's happening in Israel. You look what's going on in Niger right now, and then you throw in the threat with Yemen and all those things. So it's a very interesting time. And I know a couple of those are outside of my AOR, but they affect us. And we're called upon to help out with some of those operations as well. So it's been pretty busy. But I'll start off with Africa. We're getting out of Niger. That's going well. We had a date to get out, and that date was September 15th, and I can tell you we're on time, and that's going to happen. We've already exited base 101, and then the next one we'll do is 201, and that's going to be accomplished by the date of September 15th. Other thing that has going on over there is we're constantly trying to create relationships with folks over there in Western Africa, and that continues to go on. And I think we're seeing some progress in that respect as well. As far as Ukraine, who thought we would ever be here, 2.5 years later, and this thing would still be going on. And I think it just kind of shows the resilience of the NATO coalition and the resilience of the Ukrainian people. We've talked about it before on your show, the importance of air superiority. And when I look at lessons learned from Ukraine, I've come up with 5 operational focus areas, but most of them kind of get down to that getting air superiority. And I think we're used to, us as United States and our allies are used to having air superiority. When you go back to, let's just go back to Desert Storm, which I think you had a little play in. We didn't have it eventually, or we didn't have it off the bat, but we got it pretty quick. And it was primarily Air Force that was getting that air superiority for us. And then you fast forward into counterterrorism, and that was largely uncontested. We had air superiority going into it, and there wasn't really anything we had to do. So Afghanistan, Syria, those kind of things, we just had the luxury of having it. And I think you probably remember the pictures of our great Army and Marine brethren laying on the ground, sleeping, not dug in trenches or anything like that. That's the kind of air superiority we had there. Well, it's a lot more difficult now to get air superiority when you look at pure adversaries like China. You also look at pure adversaries like what's going on in Russia right now. But neither side, Russia or Ukraine, has been able to get air superiority. And the reason they haven't is because both sides have really advanced integrated air and missile defense systems. And anytime somebody tries to do something, that aircraft gets shot down. So the number one focus area that I have is counter anti-access aerial denial. The ability to take those strategic surface-to-air missiles down. Now, we're never going to get air superiority like we've had during Afghanistan and those kind of things. We're always going to be fighting for it. But we need to get those large strategic SAMs down, put a package together that can gain some localized air superiority for a small piece of time. And then we can get our job done, do the strike or whatever the mission is going to be. Doing that requires all domains. It's not just the Air Force anymore. We need the Space Force, we need cyber, we need Marines, we need the Navy forces, and we need long-range fires from the Army. So everyone's involved in getting this, and that's what the number one priority is. And then, as has been mentioned several times, I'm responsible for protecting every inch of NATO. So every inch, we keep expanding as we get more countries. Now, there's a lot more inches in there now. And unfortunately, the threat's a lot different than it was 2.5 years ago. We have a bunch of cheap one-way UAVs that are being created, and they're getting more and more sophisticated. And that becomes an issue on how do we shoot those things down. So that's no easy task. And I think we saw at the Washington summit, this was an item that was talked about quite extensively there. And hopefully we'll get some help with getting some of the equipment that we need for that mission. And then information sharing is another one of my focus areas, and that helps the other two out. The more that countries will share information with other countries, it increases our capability, sometimes tremendously, at very little cost. It's typically a policy change, a signature on a piece of paper, and we've increased capability, and we've had great success with that. And then another one is agile combat employment. As we, get more sophisticated cruise missiles, more sophisticated one-way UAVs, we do not have airfields where we can just park aircraft and think they're going to be protected all the time. We have to continually move them around and make sure that we're unpredictable and we stay inside the enemy's targeting cycle. And we're practicing that, and that's agile combat deployment, which is another one of my focus areas. And then the last focus area is, okay, while we're doing all that, how do we maintain command and control of our forces? How do we get them the air tasking order? If we can't, how do we ensure that they have good mission command and mission type orders to go from? So those are the kind of things that we're looking at here. And then the high-low mix is the other thing I'm looking at, is not all countries can afford the exquisite. But what we've seen with Ukraine and Russia, that there's a lot of cheat systems that enable the exquisite. And we have countries here in NATO that would be happy to build those less expensive type equipment because they can't afford the exquisite stuff, and that can be complementary to the exquisite. And sometimes it can actually do the mission by itself. So those are the things that we're looking at here, and I thought I'd just open up with that.
No, thanks very much for those insights. I think that that really does set the stage very well for some of the questions that are on folks' minds. So let's jump into some of those. You kind of alluded to the importance of, well, not importance, the fundamental dependence that we all have on partners and allies. Now, the ability to train and operate the same equipment provides a key advantage to all of us. A couple of examples: the F-35, the MQ-9, and the F-16 are, parts of this kind of shared vector. How do you see the benefits of this reality play out in the actual operational environment?
Well, the best way to have interoperable equipment is to have the same equipment. So, when you look at F-35s, I think you probably just saw Greece put in their order for 20 F-35. So the number keeps going up here, which is good news on our part because it's a very capable system. By 2032, we're going to have over 700 F-35s in theater here between the NATO nations. which is a ton of F-35s when you really think about it. And only 54 of those are going to be U.S. So, to make sure that those F-35s can operate just like a U.S. F-35 and we share information and mission data files is very important to make sure that they're just as capable as we are. F-16s, the same way. Eurofighters, the same way. And what this also helps with is agile combat employment, because now you have more bases that have the equipment necessary to service those aircraft, and you can hop around to different bases more often. You have more maintainers that are qualified to fly them. If we get really good at cross-servicing, they'll be loading munitions from the Netherlands on a US F-35. And that's where we're trying to get. It's back to the Cold War days that I came into. You were there longer than I was, but it was not uncommon to take off from any base in Europe, any NATO base, land at any other one, and be able to get a combat turn. And that skill set has atrophied over the last 30 years with the end of the Cold War, and we're building that back up now.
Oh, thanks for that. You mentioned the information age facets of collaboration. We know that both the F-35 and the MQ-9 are sensor shooters with some tremendously powerful information backbones. But that also means we've got to have sufficient access to the mission data files and other key elements required to operate in the modern battle space. Any thoughts you can share with us on where we stand on this and the progress that we still need to make?
I think we'll probably be talking this for a long time, and we'll never get to where I would want to be and probably where you'd want to be. The good news is, though, we've made tremendous progress in the last couple of years. Before Ukraine happened, we were sharing from our space assets 30 points of interest a month with our NATO allies. Today, we share 3,000 a month. And that was a policy change where we allowed to give some pictures and some SIGINT that we typically didn't give to our NATO partners. So huge success there. There is a space information that we now give our partners, not when it comes to ISR, but on other things that we've never given them to before. There's certain F-35 special access programs that now our partners are read into and they know about. There's fourth, fifth gen integration where now we can explain fifth generation aircraft capabilities to fourth generation that they didn't know before. And that allows us to be much more interoperable and work together. And there's several examples of things like this that are going on. Of course, every nation is never going to share everything that they have, including the U.S. But this needs to be not only U.S. doing it, it needs to be our allies sharing information with us, which we're starting to see now, which is great to see. And it makes us a lot more capable. And it doesn't come at much cost at all.
Well, that's all good news to hear. So thanks for sharing those perspectives. Now, you kind of alluded to it, but with Sweden and Finland's accession to NATO comes the challenge of integrating them into the NATO command structure. They've always been great partners, but now as allies, there's an integration ramp. How are you approaching this process?
Well, when Sweden and Finland came in, one of the questions I got from a reporter was, tell me about the added burden of the 1,300 kilometers that we now share with Russia and NATO that we didn't have to share before. And quite honestly, I thought of it the exact opposite. Okay, now I'm getting Finland, a country that's ordering 65 F-35s, they're going to be at my disposal. I'm getting Sweden that has almost 100 Gripens that we're going to be able to use. I have two countries that not only know what ACE stands for, but they have practiced it over the last 30 years where we haven't here in NATO. So they're going to be a huge asset when it comes to sharing TTPs and things like that concerning agile combat deployment, landing on highways, all those kind of things. They've already actually, Norway just took one of their F-35s and they landed on a highway in Sweden because the Swedish goes, oh yeah, you can do this. Here's how you do it. And they did it. So it's really going to open up some capabilities, that they have to offer when it comes to equipment, but also some TTPs when it comes to ACE. And then, of course, they have other assets that they're going to help out with as well. And plus, they've always been our partner. So it's not like we haven't worked with them before, but now it's, going to be even more so that we'll be able to work with them. They're already helping out with air policing. We have Finland that's been down in Southern Europe doing some air policing with us. So they both jumped in with 2 feet. And that Nordic area region, they are very close, with Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden. Anytime I hold a conference or something, they're always huddled together, talking and everything. And to me, they're so close that I can give them some mission type orders and then just know that it's going to get done because they're going to figure it out because they're that close. So anyways, I think it's a huge benefit to us, and I really welcome them joining NATO and bringing us up to 32.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Now, while we're in that vicinity in the region, are we back to the future when it comes to guarding against threats coming over the North Pole? Obviously, this was a major focal point during the Cold War. And given the range and speed of modern weapons, we need to expand the detection range, beginning in Northern Europe and Scandinavia. How do you see this challenge evolving from your position?
Yeah, it's definitely very important that we do expand our sensors and be able to get up and sense in that region because we do have some blind spots. It's not only for NATO countries, but it's also for the U.S. I think you've probably seen Northcom, General Gouy coming up on the network saying that he needs some more things, and industries now looking at things, over the horizon radars, or some of the things, a lot of space assets that might be able to do this kind of thing. So we're looking hard at that. We know we have some gaps, but with the global warming and getting a lot of areas that you couldn't take Navy ships through, now there's going to be Navy ships there that can obviously carry surface-to-air missiles and TLAMs and everything else. We just have to be on top of that. And I think the NATO summit, when they talked about getting more integrated air and missile defense, the discussion of sensors also came up there too. And we know that we need to be able to sense something before we can shoot it. So I think it's a very important thing that we have to think about here in NATO and the United States, and quite honestly in the Indo-Pacific, with Alaska up there and things. So we need to be really on this, and I think we're moving in that direction.
Thank you. Now, an item of huge interest is the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. As you mentioned earlier, it clearly underlines the importance of air power, whether that's air superiority, ISR, or strike. Now, Ukraine's getting F-16s. There's some reports that they already have them. That's obviously a good thing. But can you give us a reality check on what we might expect to see from Ukrainians operating F-16s?
Yeah, you bet. I've said this before. It's not going to be the golden BB or the golden bullet that all of a sudden, they have F-16s and now they're going to go out and gain air superiority. And it's not just because it's Ukraine, and it's just, the integrated air and missile defense systems that they're going up against is that good. And we have a hard time with 5th generation aircraft going against that. But it does move them a step in the right direction. They've already kind of taken that step where they've gotten some Western tanks, Western munitions, And now this is a pretty big one, an F-16. Now they're getting Western aircraft. Well, with all that equipment comes with Western training, which is a cultural shift for somebody who was trained by the Russians years ago. And that takes time. You know, a 7-month course on how to fly an F-16 isn't going to change that culture overnight. And we've seen that with other Eastern Bloc countries that now are members of NATO. But at least hacks the clock that we've started that transition to Western TTPs, to Western doctrine, to Western equipment. And they're going to be much better off and a much better supporter and partner once they mature with all these capabilities that we're giving them, you know. But it's not going to be, you know, overnight. This is talking, you know, decades to kind of get to that point. But we started the clock, and I think that's a good start.
Well, thank you. On a related issue, and at the risk of stating the obvious, it's crucial that the U.S. and our allies bolster efforts to defend our air bases. Now, here at Mitchell Institute, we just released a report on this topic. Dispersing aircraft to alternate locations, hardened shelters, and diversified logistics are important, but so too are active sensor shooter options that can engage across the spectrum at scale. It's always smarter, cheaper, and more effective to kill the archers as opposed to just sitting back and shooting the arrows. Any thoughts on how USAFE is approaching this?
Yeah, it's kind of multifaceted. You know, our agile combat employment does that dispersal that you're talking about. But there's a lot of passive measures that you can use as well. You know, and this is, we used to do this all the time back in the Cold War, and you kind of got out of that business. But having, you know, decoys at different places, setting them up, moving them, you know, just to complicate the targeting cycle for the adversary is something that we need to really do. But different than the Cold War is the precision of the munitions that we now face from the adversary, and the quantity of precision munitions. So when you're talking, we were just talking about cruise missiles about 2.5 years ago, and they were pretty expensive, so a country couldn't buy a lot of these things. But what we see now are $10,000, $20,000 one-way UAVs, produced obviously cheaply, and produced in mass and at scale, and they're quite capable as well. They know how to fly at low altitude, they know how to avoid sensors, and they have a pretty good package to get them to the target that they're anticipating to get to. So, you know, the problem got complicated here in the last 2.5 years. And the proliferation, now, you know, we saw what the Houthis did here recently. So every country, you know, can afford these kind of things, and we have to go against them. Now, here's what we can't do. We can't go against them with a Patriot. We can't go against them with the SM-3. We can't go against them with a $1 million AMRAAM, right? Because that is on the wrong side of the cost curve when it comes to those things. So we need to come up with some innovative things to do, and the Ukraine, out of necessity, has come up with some things. You know, first of all, you need to detect it. Well, things that fly at 100 or 300 feet with a radar that's on the ground due to line of sight and curvature of the earth, you're not going to see it past about 10 miles. So that doesn't give you much time to get something that you can arm against and take it down. So they came up with a system called Sky Fortress, and there's other acoustic systems that are out there as well. But their system basically takes, just think of a cell phone, puts it on a 6-foot tower and puts a microphone next to it to amplify the noise. And they're able to detect these one-way UAVs just because of the noise that they cause when they come over the land. They have roughly 9,000 of these in country. All of those feeds go into a central database where all the triangulation takes place. And then they can have these forward mobile deployable teams with an iPad, and with 6 hours of training, they can sit on a AAA gun with an iPad and start seeing where these are coming from. They're on a mobile AAA machine. They cruise over there to get in position, and then they shoot these things down with AAA or with a Stinger, with a man pad, something that is on the right side of the cost curve. And they've been very successful. You know, they had an attack the other day. It had 84 one-way UAVs. They detected with the Skyfortress system all 84, and they shot down 80 with AAA. That's on the right side of the cost curve. Now we're going to get even beyond that, you know, so we got to come up with some low-cost systems to go after these. But once you start massing, there's just not enough AAA out there to make it happen. So we're looking at other techniques, and I'm sure in the open press you hear about microwave, you hear about laser, you know, directed energy, these kind of things. We still need to progress there, because it's not that this threat is coming, it's already here. You know, it has already happened, and we're seeing it play out live. And in my theater, China already invaded Taiwan. It happened 2.5 years ago. And now we're seeing lessons learned out of this, and we want to make sure that we spread those lessons learned to everyone else, because the nature of warfare has changed with the advent of these small, cheap one-way UAVs.
Well, let's continue to expand on this line of discussion a bit. You recently oversaw Astral Night 2024, which was a major exercise focused on integrated air and missile defense. Can you walk us through the key insights your command got from this exercise, and how did conducting that help enhance NATO's collective defense?
Yeah, you bet. This was primarily an exercise with the Baltics and Poland, and we deployed a deployable air operations center out there. There's about 50 aircraft involved, as well as obviously all the surface-to-air missile systems and everything. Unfortunately, we lost some of our Navy systems because of the ongoing conflict that was happening with Israel. But we were able to take what we call ACBN, which is the Air Command Battle Network, and we're able to share U.S. feeds with Polish feeds, with the Baltic feeds, and get that all together. So we had one common operating picture. We are able to, for the first time that at least I know, we passed off the Regional Air Defense Command to Poland. So they had the RATSI that they were using there. And of course, tons of lessons learned. You know, we need to do more training. We need to do more of this. ACE, we got some good lessons learned on training when it came to ACE as we're moving the aircraft around, that we're there in a defensive role to protect different things. But we got some great lessons learned that I think we'll build upon. We had, luckily, we had General Gorns, who was me, but you know, about 16 years ago, and he was able to attend and be there for the entire thing as a senior mentor. And he just did a great job, you know, coaching the team up and getting them up to speed. And by the end of it, you know, I don't want to say that we were perfect, but we definitely learned a lot of lessons and got a lot better and figured out that, hey, this is kind of the right way to do it. And now we can take that to different parts of NATO, as we will at the next Astral Night when that comes up in 2026.
Super. Now, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, NATO's air policing operations have grown in both intensity and number. Now, a lot of folks out there that, you know, aren't watching every day are not necessarily familiar just what air policing in NATO is all about. So could you explain how these missions have evolved since the outbreak of the war, and what's the U.S. doing to not only conduct its own air policing missions, but also providing supporting infrastructure for our allies?
Yeah, you bet. So air policing, like you say, has been part of NATO for a long time. And for those who don't know exactly what it is, it's typically we have 3 to 4 aircraft at several different countries, some owned by NATO, and then some owned by the host nation. But the ones I deal with are the ones that are owned by NATO, and they're strategically placed in different countries. So if to protect our airspace. So if we have an incursion by an aircraft that is not NATO, they're on an alert, and they will take off and they will intercept that aircraft with live weapons, and just see what the intent is and those kind of things. And out of these, almost 100% of them are safe, professional. It's an adversary testing our defense posture, and of course this goes back and forth both ways. And we've been doing that for a long time. So when Ukraine kicked off, instead of just having them on the ground in an alert status, they were airborne. And we maintained 24/7 coverage for a while because we didn't know the exact intentions of Russia. I think that did exactly what it was meant to do, cause a deterrence. So Russia, even if they had not planned to, now they're not even thinking about it because of the air police and that we had airborne 24/7. Well, as Ukraine went on for a while, we've kind of stood that down a little bit. So we're not airborne 24/7, but what air policing into what we call enhanced air policing. So we have an area up in the north, area down in the south, that we have squadron size elements. So think 6 to 12 kind of aircraft that will deploy to different places, up in the Baltics or maybe down in Romania. We have 2 of those that are kind of always ongoing. And instead of doing an air policing mission, they are doing training missions in that area that we think that they might fight in the future. And they're getting some great training on the mission sets that I talked to you about, whether that's IMD, whether that's counter A2AD, and then sometimes we'll pair them up with other units that are in the area, and we will have large force employment exercises that they can practice. So it gives us a good opportunity to practice what we'd be doing real world should an Article 5 situation be declared. And it helps us out with ACE. It helps us out with cross-servicing. It allows us to put equipment at these bases that everyone can use, air-ground age equipment. So it really has helped us, and that's kind of what we're doing, and we've been doing that for the last couple of years, since the invasion happened.
Well, thanks for that. Now, the war in Ukraine highlights the need for large quantities of survivable air power that you already talked about, and air power that can understand the battle space real time, collaborate, and then get back to base safe and regenerate. In other words, advanced stealthy aircraft. What are your thoughts about the capability and capacity imperative of 5th generation and beyond as you've watched this conflict evolve?
Having stood up the first operational F-22 squadron back in 2004 or 5, I know what stealth brings. We started off with 2 aircraft there. One was maintenance, one was ops. And there was 2 people that could fly it, me and another person. And we would go up against F-15s, which I flew for 15 some odd years, the greatest air superiority fighter ever, right? Yep. And I would kill all 4 before they'd even see me. I mean, it was just that much of an advantage. Now, fast forward, 20 years, the adversary's gotten smarter, and they always will. They're coming up with different ways to detect 5th gen aircraft, et cetera. And as they do that, just like we've done with every other weapon system, we need to mature our weapon system to still give us an advantage over them. And we continue to do that. Over here in Europe, it's very important that we do that. And I know that we're not the pacing threat. The pacing threat is China. The pacing threat should be China. But I'm responsible for Europe and Africa. So we need to continue to move on. And the good news from my standpoint is I have 32 other nations that are helping me out. So as long as I can be interoperable with those, and they buy Western very capable equipment like 700 F-35s by 2032, that keeps me, alive and gives me enough equipment that even if I'm not the pacing threat and getting, the predominance of the money from the Air Force, I can use my allies to help me out with that. And then you throw in the high-low mix, where now I can take 15 countries that really couldn't afford and couldn't help a whole lot with the NATO with exquisite stuff. Now they can purchase one-way UAVs that can make the exquisite better, or sometimes even do the mission all by themselves. So yes, stealth is very important. 5th gen is very important. By itself, it's not going to do anything if you don't update it and change it. It's not going to keep going as well. So I welcome stealth. That's great. I love it, but we got to always, compare it to what the threats capabilities are getting, and they're advancing their capabilities. So we need to as well.
Now, looking ahead, what do you see as the most significant set of challenges and opportunities for Airpower in EUCOM and AFRICOM, these areas that you're responsible for over the next decade? You talked a little bit about that. Any more insights or concerns you have?
Okay, well, let's talk about the opportunities. Of course, the illegal invasion of Russia into the Ukraine was terrible. A lot of folks have a lot of casualties based on that. But it did unite NATO, something that hadn't been this close in over 30 years. It really united them in a way we haven't seen in a long time for NATO. So that's an opportunity. We have now 23 countries that by the end of this year should be spending 2% of their GDP, as opposed to before the invasion where we had 7. That creates opportunities. We have some countries that have obligated up to 4% of their GDP. We have General retired, now Secretary Austin, host the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group about once a month. I think there's been like 23 of them, 24 of them, something like that so far. All of the NATO allies come, but so do a lot of other allies. Japan's typically always on there on the TV, but it's typically 50 ministers of defense that go to that almost monthly. And then they donate equipment, they talk about needs, and they do all that. It's a great conference, but it just shows that we're on the right side of this fight. We can get 50, and I don't think Putin's held one of these meetings yet. And if he did, I could name probably 3 people that would go to it, and they might not even go to it. So to me, that's an opportunity, uniting NATO, getting us back to where we were before, so that we can buy the things that will provide deterrence. And that's what NATO is all about. It's all about deterrence. No one in NATO wants to go to war. But if we're not prepared to go to war, if we're not prepared to win in war, then we're not going to be able to deter. Now, some of the challenges, I think the big one is the proliferation of these small one-way UAVs. It's a tremendous challenge. It puts us on the wrong side of the cost curve, but we can use them well and put adversaries on the wrong side of the cost curve as well. But we have got to come up with cheaper ways and ways to do it more in mass to disable these things, because it's the way of the future and everyone can afford them. And this doesn't just apply to this theater. This is in Africa too, because they're that cheap that I could definitely see them being used down there as well. So those are the the biggest opportunities, I think, as well as the things that keep me up at night.
I appreciate that. We got one more question for you here before we shift over to our audience. We're at a point where security threats in the United States and our allies, quite frankly, have never been greater than they are today. Yet we all face some serious capacity and capability shortfalls. But then so did our leaders in the front part of World War II. You recently participated in the 80th anniversary commemoration of D-Day. So what do you see as the legacy of D-Day 80 years later?
I tell you what a tremendous opportunity that was. They didn't call them the greatest generation, for no reason at all. I mean, because these folks are typically very, very impressive. Most of them, I think the oldest one I met was 106. Talked to his son, and I go, is he in a home? Where's he at? And he's like, oh no, he lives by himself. He goes, my sister is, a block down the way and checks on him once a day. He still walks every day to breakfast. But I had the opportunity to talk to these folks, and you talk about, Americans. They're just great Americans, a great generation. But like us, they wouldn't have been able to do this by themselves. It took all of America being in on this, all of our allies being in on this. And when you look at the GDP rates, when you're talking during the, towards the middle of the World War II timeframe, a lot of nations were above 50% of their GDP was being used on the war. And, we're at 2 to 3, 4%, in NATO right now. I think the country, if something should happen, I think industry will back us. I just need to make sure it's in time, because there's a spin up cycle. It's not all of a sudden you're producing X amount of widgets right away. So there needs to be an investment now, and this has been talked about a lot. So this isn't anything new. And I think most people know it. We got to make sure that we make that investment now, because that's going to help us provide the deterrence so we don't have to go to war. The only thing more expensive than making all this equipment for war is if you actually go to war. So we got to, stop it from the beginning. And, one of these guys turned 100 years old. We sang him happy birthday, and then somebody asked him, he goes, hey, what's the best thing about being 100? And he goes, no peer pressure. That kind of tells you about the kind of folks these guys are, right? So
that's awesome. I would just add to underline what you just said is I think as most folks out there have read about the release of the Commission on the National Defense Strategy, it just unveiled its review of our defense strategy and unanimously concluded that the United States is dangerously unprepared to meet the very real prospect of war, and that the trends are getting worse, not better. So thanks for your remarks. And now let's open it up to our audience. I think all of you here understand the drill. When I call on you, please unmute your mic, state your name and affiliation. And you can also submit questions in the chat function. So let's kick it off with Chris Gordon. Chris, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, sir, for doing this. Two questions on Ukraine and Russia. One, what are you seeing the latest Russian Air Force? What are the latest Air Force tactics in Ukraine? And then for the Ukrainians, what are the future pilot munitions and maintenance plans for their F-16s? Will they receive U.S. munitions? They'll receive AMRAAMs, AIM-9s, JDAM-ERs, all-diameter bombs. Is that the case? And on maintenance, how will that work? These are complex weapons. Will U.S. contractors be allowed in Ukraine, for example? And if these plans are not in place, how serious is the West about providing Ukraine with that capability? Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I missed the first part of your question, so let me answer the second part, and then if you could repeat the first, you broke up there. I was something about the Russian Air Force. But as far as Ukraine and the Air Force, we've already given them, several munitions, and they're public, like the ones you talked about. So they already have them. They're just dropping them off MiG-29s and Su-24s and those kind of things. So those munitions that you spoke of that we've already given them, now they're going to have the opportunity to actually drop them off of an airplane that they were designed to come off of, which will give them more capability to change the targets in flight and things like that they're not able to do with their other aircraft. So that's going to increase the capability. We're also not only just training pilots, we're training maintainers as well. So we're doing that. I'm not going to go into, who's going over there, how many contractors, U.S., other nations, just because I don't think that's appropriate to pass on. But we are definitely looking into the maintenance and how we're going to do that. And I think we have a good way forward to make that happen. And if you could just repeat that the first question about the Russian aircraft, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you. And I understand your caveat, certainly. What are you seeing from the Russian Air Force lately? Obviously, we all know about the drones, and this is a big issue, but what other tactics are the Russians using?
Quite honestly, they're doing a lot of the things that Ukraine is doing. They don't have air superiority. If they had air superiority, they would be capping over the borders of Poland and Romania and Ukraine, and anything that comes in that the 50 allies have donated, they'd be doing close air support, taking all that stuff out. But they don't have air superiority, so they can't do it. So what they have to do is they have to do similar to Ukraine, coming in low altitudes, getting below the radars, popping up, dropping off a glide bomb, and then exiting, kind of thing. So that's kind of the tactics that both sides, have resorted to, just because of the advanced integrated air and missile defense systems that are on both sides.
Thank you.
Let's go to John Harper. John?
Great. Thanks for doing it, Carl. You mentioned the importance of information sharing and interoperability with the other services and with allies and partners. And I was wondering to what extent you've been using this minimum viable capability for CJADC2 that Deputy Secretary Hicks has been talking about. Something you're using, and what's kind of your initial feedback on that, and what are some challenges that still need to be addressed with that?
Can you explain to me a little bit more about the minimum viable capability? I just want to make sure that I understand the question.
Sure. Deputy Secretary Hicks has been promoting, the combined joint all-domain command and control concept, and she's said that a minimum viable capability has been released already, and DoD hasn't been talking a lot about the details necessarily of where that's being used and some of the intricacies of that, but they have announced that it has been deployed. So I was just wondering if in your AOR you're using that information sharing capability, and what kind of your initial feedback is on that capability, and what are some of the challenges with JADC2 or CJADC2 that you're seeing out there?
Okay, yeah. Are you talking like a replicator? I know she's doing a lot. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
No, the combined joint all domain command and control using AI, other data analytics capabilities to kind of pass information from sensors and shooters to decision makers.
Yeah. So in essence, JADC2 and those kind of things. Obviously, we work on that every day. From a couple different standpoints. One, we know with the precision and increase in number of both cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and one-way UAVs that we don't have sanctuaries anymore. So we're practicing with our command and control, COOP, continuity to operate and survive, and moving to different places and hiding in place and these kind of things. And there's a lot of different ways that you can connect up to a system and have things in the cloud and this kind of stuff, so you can be moving around doing all this. Well, it's one thing to get that system in place. It's another to put some AI over the top of that can help enable decision makers to complete kill chains with situational awareness that they haven't had before. So if you're able to connect the sensors, and then you have the shooters that are there, and the AI machine says, okay, here's 5 different ways you can connect that and make this kill chain happen. Then, here's the one I recommend. In that recommendation, do the AI pulling data from, how many ATACMs are left over, how many JDAMs are left over, who can get there the quickest, does the Navy ship have many TLAMs on board? You can get that in a minimal amount of time, and then it will also predict the success rate based on what kill chain that you're going to be able to use. So those are things that we're all looking into. We're not there yet, but we're definitely looking at that, and anything that we get from OSD and the HAF we use, but then we develop a lot of these things ourselves, and then we pass those, and they help out complete the JADC2 effort. And this isn't, JADC2 isn't something that that you're gonna fix overnight. This is another thing that's a really long lead time to get all this stuff to work, but I'm now starting to see some results. When we just talked about it and it was PowerPoint deep, 4 or 5 years ago, now we're starting to get some results out of it. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you. And just from an air defense perspective, as you try to tackle the threat posed by these one-way UAVs, how important going forward in the future do you think that JADC2 capability is going to be for protecting air bases, for example?
I think it's extremely, extremely important, because it's going to be an all-domain issue. The hardest part that Ukraine has kind of solved, but we don't have all the sensors over here, is trying to make sure you can detect things over the size of, NATO, that are down at 100 feet. If you just try to do that traditionally, you have to put, a Sentinel radar every 5 miles around the country. But if you can use some cheap ways to do that with the acoustics model that Ukraine's using, the quote to me was, for a country the size of Romania, you could do it for about $6 billion, or $6 million, which is way cheaper, than one Sentinel radar. So those are things that we got to put in place. And then we need to have a master integrator that takes all those sensors, not only just that, but the traditional sensors that we're used to, over the horizon, et cetera. And then we have to set up a kill chain so that, where do we put the low cost effectors that can take these down, pulling out, AAA that we haven't used before, and then using more exquisite advanced technology like microwave and direct energy weapons and these kind of things. It is not an easy problem. And I think the best way that we need to get after this is, we can't afford to have all 32 countries in NATO buy their own thing and then spend the same amount of money to make that interoperable, after they've already bought it. We need to integrate it by design. And there's an effort that's kind of going forward. If you've heard of this Sky Shield initiative, started by Germany, we've had 17 NATO countries sign on to it. But it kind of divides the airspace into low altitude, medium altitude, high altitude. High, ballistic missiles; medium, typically aircraft; low, one-way UAVs. And here are the capabilities that we need in each of those 3 areas. So not necessarily tell them what system to buy, but tell them here's the capability that system needs to have. And then that gives that country the ability to buy whatever they want, whether they want European, whether they want US, whatever. We just need the capability, and we need it to be open architecture so we can hook this thing up. And in that way, we're not spending all this money later on trying to make everything interoperable. It's interoperable from the get-go because of the way the system was set up.
Thank you.
Let's try Steve Trumbull again. Steve?
Hello, did this work?
Yeah, we got you.
Sorry, I had my own C2 issues here. So, no, but thank you very much. So, we're about 3 years away from the Air Force fielding the first increment of collaborative combat aircraft. And from the combatant command perspective, how are you looking at that at this point about how you're going to integrate that kind of very different new capability into your force structure? Do you need new units? Do you need new manpower? And how do you exercise and operate with space access? Is all that being thought through?
It is, and CCAs is going to change quite a few things, quite honestly. So CCAs, obviously, they're going to be cheaper because you don't have a man in the aircraft, so all the life support systems and those kind of things. So that brings the cost down. Depending on the cost of the CCA, and I think we're going to see a vast range. Some will be, more acceptable if, to put them in high-risk situations and treat them because of the cost. But some are probably going to be pretty expensive, and you're not going to put them in that situation, or you're going to save it for a unique mission that, that is high risk that you need to get the mission done. But how do you train with them? I think we'll always have some of them that are available at an airfield that will take off with an F-35 or with an F-22 and carry, extra AMRAAMs for them or some electronic attack for them and those kind of things. But I think the majority of them are going to be sitting in a warehouse somewhere, hopefully in theater, so you can get to them fairly quickly. And they'll be maintained, but it's not going to be a daily maintenance cycle like we think of an aircraft. It's going to be quarterly, yearly, who knows, but we'll figure that out. And they'll be there for when we need them. So not only is the cost cheaper because you don't have to put the manned stuff in there, but it's cheaper because you're not flying it all the time. So you don't have a flying hour cost that goes with a manned aircraft. So, as you say, 3 years, this is new. My hunch is we won't get it exactly right when we bring these things out. We might have, too many on the airfield or not enough on the airfield. And of course, there's going to be simulators involved so you can still train without these things flying with you every day. So there's going to be a learning curve as we go through this. But I think everyone's excited about it, quite honestly. And a lot of companies are coming up with some unique ideas, and some of these are relatively cheap. So I'm excited about it, and I look forward to it.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our session. General Hecker, thanks so very much for sharing your insights and perspectives. Your leadership in these challenging times is truly commendable. So from all of us at the Mitchell Institute, have a great Air and Space Power kind of day.